Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The near total shutdown of schools at the beginning of the COVID pandemic caused historic disruptions in K-12 education and beyond. At their peak, these closures affected 97% of K-12 students, or approximately 55 million students. It was obvious in the beginning that children were suffering from shuttered classrooms. Despite this, many school districts prolonged school shutdowns, some for months and some for over a year. Other districts waffled back and forth between the two, causing mass uncertainty for educators, students, and parents. Other students have faced continued disruptions to their learning due to restrictive quarantine regulations or stringent masking and vaccine requirements. Majority of the students forced into online education fell behind significantly. According to the most recent National Assessment of Educational Progress report, the average scores for nine-year-olds in 2022 declined 5 points in reading and 7 points in mathematics compared to 2020. This is the biggest drop in reading scores since 1990 and the first ever drop in math. Other analysis found that on average, students were 5 months behind in math, 4 months behind in reading by the end of 2020-2021 academic year. Students kept out of school even longer are faring worse. The numbers are also worse for historically disadvantaged communities. School closures did not only affect students, but also left high schoolers more likely not to graduate or pursue college. These closures didn't only affect academic performance. Many adolescents also face immense emotional and mental trauma during the pandemic due to forced social isolation. 3 major pediatric organizations last fall declared adolescents' mental health as a national emergency. To help schools reopen, they were given exorbitant amounts of COVID-19 funding with zero accountability measures in place to ensure these taxpayer dollars were spent appropriately. Through ESSER alone, states were giving $190 billion to help schools open safely. On top of this, the science and data from schools had reportedly showed that schools were not the major vector for spread, and few children were at risk of serious illness from COVID-19. Even the Washington Post ran a headline November 20, 2020, stating that schools are not spreading COVID-19. And the Atlantic ran this headline in October of 2020. Schools aren't super spreaders. Fears from the summer appears to have been overblown. Keep in mind, these articles were posted at the end of 2020, eight or 9 months after the beginning of school closures. Yet many schools did not open. We now know this is because of the immense pressure placed on school boards, school administrators, local politicians, the Biden administration, and even the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention by powerful teacher unions. If it wasn't obvious before, it's obvious now. Teachers' unions have an outsized and unhealthy influence on K-12 education. Multiple studies suggest that union influence affected school operating decisions more than COVID-19 infection rates. This proves that teachers' unions are motivated by politics, not science, and definitely not for the interests of our students and their education. A Los Angeles teachers union, for instance, used the pandemic as an opportunity to push for radical social change. Reports from around the world continue to mount up about the dangers of our children's mental health and learning loss. Instead of addressing these issues, our children were used as hostages, as the teacher unions demanded Medicare for all, outlawing charter schools and defunding the police. Other teacher unions also made demands, and when these demands were met, they moved the goalposts. For example, even after teachers were pushed to the front of the vaccine line, many unions decided to still not reopen schools. Despite this havoc that they wreaked on our educational system, teachers unions have faced no consequence of their actions, nor have the school district officials or Democratic politicians who let them run the show. Republicans are demanding accountability. Republicans are also demanding answers on how schools have been spending the ESSER funds. Republicans urged patience after the bipartisan second round of COVID relief in December 2020, but the Democrats ignored these warnings and forged ahead with another $120 billion. As a result, we now have some schools that have wasted these funds rather than to improve athletics, that is to improve athletics facilities or invite critical race theory consultants to their schools. Congress' allocation of emergency pandemic relief was so excessive that the Wall Street Journal editorialized, Democrats are using the banner of COVID relief not to increase student learning, but to reward Democratic constituency at taxpayers' expense. While Democrats' opposition to the American Rescue Plan has proven correct, we also believe these funds should be used to address students' learning loss now that they have been appropriated. States like Tennessee are leading the way by using taxpayer dollars to address these learning loss that students have experienced. This is an example we should follow. Pandemic policies have failed our students. We must do all we can to right this situation and put our students back on track to success. Thank you, and I'll go back.